Professor Sir Mike, colleagues, guests, supporters, students, and Jim. Thank you very much, Jim, for that. You might have heard writers say that awards are not important to them, and really it's their writing that's the important thing. I have to tell you this is patently not true, and I am absolutely delighted to receive this award. What means just as much is that I am able to accept this award in person, in a room full of real-life students. I recognise some of you from teaching on the Diploma in Advanced Non-Fiction, but it's lovely to see you in the flesh, to see all of you, and not just the bit contained in a little Zoom box. I have to tell you, I still wake up in the night with a start and worry that I've left someone in the breakout room. So if you're one of those people, who knows, perhaps you're still there, I'm truly sorry. Before I talk a little about you and what you've meant to me, I wanted to reflect on how far continuing education has come in the 20 or so years I've been involved. So I'd like to take you back about 25 years, and I can do that because I'm a creative writer. I could take you back to Tudor times if I wanted to, but then we'd have to worry about tooth decay and the bubonic plague, so I'm not going to do that. About 25 years ago, I went on a course at ICE. It was a weekend about the 1920s. And at the time, I was writing a biography of Midge Johnson, who was a record-breaking pilot, the first to fly from England to Australia solo. And I wanted to know more about the times in which she lived. So I signed up for a course taught by the historian Peter Street. It was the first time I'd been in a classroom since I'd completed my degree, and it was the first time I'd spent any time away from my daughter, who was still a baby. What I immediately liked about the course was that I was among people who loved learning, but who came from completely different worlds from mine. I also loved the feeling of belonging, and I remember how one of the students was an elderly lady from Japan, and she spotted I was missing my daughter, and somehow she managed to produce from nowhere a doll for me to take home to my daughter. My experience as a student persuaded me that it might be fun to teach creative writing. It would get me out of the house, as Jim said, and away from my laptop. I mean, how hard could it really be? The first course I taught was a weekend program called The Biographers, the Body Snatchers of Literature. That's a quote from a play by Oscar Wilde. And I still think it's an excellent title for a course, and I'd be very happy to revive it if Jim would like me to. Although it was about 20 years ago, I still remember very vividly meeting the students in the Hickson room, which is just over there, and how absolutely terrifying it was. At the first break, I went to the toilets by the main entrance, went into a cubicle, put my head in my hands, and wept silently. What I was crying about was that the students were so clever, much cleverer than me. How could I teach them anything? But if we get back in the time machine and fast forward to today, one thing hasn't changed. The students, you, are just as clever, in fact, probably much cleverer than those first students I taught. The difference is that I've changed. Rather than finding my students' talents a reason to weep, I rejoice in being in a Zoom room with such brilliant people. I love the fact that our students come from around the world and from all walks of life, that I might have a 20-year-old chatting to someone in their 80s, that a doctor can learn from someone who left school at 16, and that I always leave a course with a longer reading list than the one I designed for the programme. Some of you may go on, like other undergraduate students before you, to further study, to a master's or even a PhD. You might win prizes or even get a story or a book published. I know that those sorts of achievements make me and the other tutors very happy, but we're equally thrilled when we see you fulfill your own personal dreams, which may have nothing to do with publication or further study. And I often think of Ruth, who Jim mentioned. She joined a short course I taught in a church hall in the middle of Cambridge. Ruth was in her 70s and had come to England in the 1930s on the Kinder transport. an organisation set up to rescue mainly Jewish children from Nazi-controlled Europe. Ruth wrote some incredibly vivid pieces, and one I remember most clearly is her describing as a little girl looking out of the window of her apartment at the Nazi banners and the cavalcade as Hitler's right-hand man, Heinrich Himmler, was welcomed to Vienna. I was particularly delighted to read Ruth's work because she told me that as a girl, she had been informed by her teacher that she couldn't write and she had nothing worth saying. When Ruth passed away, her daughter phoned me to say how much the creative writing classes had meant to her and how her children were so pleased that they had a written account of their mother's early life. It's a privilege to teach someone like Ruth, but it's a privilege to teach full stop. This was particularly true during the days of the pandemic. It still seems something of a triumph that we made it through those very difficult months. The days before we had a vaccine, and when things looked really grim indeed. Like, I guess, most people in this room, being able to escape into books and writing kept me going. But what you may not realise is that turning up to teach every week, reading your work, and listening to your discussions kept me going too. And I know I speak for all the tutors when I say that. You turned up week after week, no matter how grim things were. Sometimes you turned up from a hospital bed or after you'd been to the funeral of a loved one. You made friends on Zoom, you introduced us to new writers, you made us laugh when there wasn't much to laugh about. And you took us away from masks and safe distancing and endless hand washing. So in conclusion, I'd like to dedicate this award to you students, without whom I just wouldn't be standing here. And I'd also like to end on a lofty literary note by reading an extract from a poem by Dr. Seuss. I read this recently at a wedding. This is from Oh, the Places You'll Go. Congratulations, today is your day. You're off to great places, you're off and away. You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own. And you know what you know, and you are the guy or girl who'll decide where to go. You'll look up and down streets, look 'em over with care. About some you will say, I don't choose to go there. With your head full of brains and your shoes full of feet, you're too smart to go down any not-so-good street. And you may not find any you'll want to go down. In that case, of course, you'll head straight out of town. It's opener there in the wide open air. Out there things can happen, and frequently do, to people as brainy and footsy as you. And when things start to happen, don't worry, don't stew. Just go right along. You'll start happening too. Thank you.